When night creeps in, it's a comforting feeling knowing that you have the ability and the resources in your environment to procure light, even if it's only temporary. Whether you have to finish a project by candlelight or firelight, or you have to fight off or ward off a predator that's invaded your camp, this backcountry torch will provide an ample light source for you. So using our foraged materials, I'm going to begin by using my knife, and safely I'm going to process our hardwood shaft for our torch and split it into 4 separate sections. As you can see, I got my first split right down the middle, and all I'm going to be doing is turning it sideways again, pick up my baton or hardwood stick, so now I'm just taking simple sticks that I found off of the ground, and I'm going to begin by just placing those sticks into the splits and wedging them open. And I'm just using the spine of my knife, not the edge, and just hammering that stick into the wedge, and it's just splitting that open even more, all the way down to the base. Now we're going to take our coniferous cones, and this can be spruce, pine, balsam, whatever cones you can actually forage, and we're going to actually start to wedge these in, creating almost like a cup-formed shape. So when you're shoving in your pine cones, you want to make sure that the bases are all touching, leaving the tops open and splayed, so you have an open rim that we can actually shove and place all of our resinous materials that are actually going to be flammable and create and hold our flame down into it. So we've created our wick, and our wick is processed and made out of fibrous material, and this can be any kind of fibrous bark. In this case, we went with cedar bark, and all we've done is we've hand spun it and rolled it, just processing it with our hands. And then we've gone and collected a ton of resins and impregnated it into the wick, which will actually make it a flammable source. So with our wick made and the outline of our torch created, all that's left right now for us to do is to fill the fuel source, which is all of our pine resin that we've collected and foraged from the trees. And we're actually just going to begin to work this in. And these pine resins contain terpenes, which are extremely flammable, which make this an ample fuel source and why we're using it today. And resin can be in many states, and it can be extremely hard or it can be very soft. It can also be extremely brittle. What we're looking for this is extremely malleable and soft resin. So now that we filled it with resin, we're just going to go over and make sure all of our pine cones are sitting well and touching at the base, because that creates our tight seal so the resin doesn't just drip all the way through and all over the place. And the wick is actually placed right down into the center. The resin is going to form around it and actually hold the wick in a tight spot. So once it is ignited, it will actually carry the flame down to the fuel source and ignite the entire torch. If we were to leave it as is, we can actually get some serious injuries from the burns, from the resin dripping down, and it can cause wildfire. So we're going to take a precaution right now to prevent all of that using our bark. Roughly, using my knife, I'm going to measure out the circumference of the base of the torch. I'm going to use the tip of my knife and just slowly and gently begin to drill into the bark. And what this is actually going to do is it's going to give us a hole right in the middle of this piece of bark. Now I'm just going around and just cleaning up the cut hole. And I'm just going to give it a quick measure just to see if my dimensions are still the same. And there we go. So the final step here, I'm just using moss but you can use any kind of vegetation, leaves or sticks. And I'm just sealing the gaps in between the base plate of bark and the torch, which will prevent any of the resin from dripping down and potentially either burning your hand or creating a forest fire. All that's left to do is either to put a spike on this and plant it in the ground, but in our case, because we're on the Canadian Shield, I'll just be putting a few rocks around it, holding it firmly in place. The actual stand for the torch can actually take a few burns. So if you keep resin on hand, you can actually fill this up a few times without having to cut more live wood.